Hi, welcome to this webinar focused on the next release of InterBase, codenamed Mise in Place. And with me are Sriram, Charlie, and Mary, a good part of the InterBase team at Embarcadero. Okay, just for your information, all presenter, our lines are muted. There is a question section, so feel free to ask questions anytime. We will have a Q&A section at the end, but if you want to start entering your question earlier, this is absolutely fine. We can start previewing your question. The webinar is being recorded and we'll make the recording available on the Embarcadero YouTube channel. Next, this is your presenter. I'm Marco Cantu, product manager for Route Studio and InterBase. With me, there is Sriram, who's the engineering team and lead architect, Charlie, who's the principal software architect, and Mary, who's a software consultant and expert in InterBase. They'll all take part of the webinar. And the focus is InterBase, our ultra-fast scalable embeddable SQL database. Well, we'll go through the current top features and the features planned for this year. And speaking of which, if we go to the next slide, I have to tell you that these plans represent our intentions as of this date and our development plans, but plans and priorities are subject to change due to many factors, and so we cannot offer any commitment or any form of assurance that anything we're presenting today will ultimately be released in the product and released when we are mentioning / planning. Any development schedule or roadmap is not a commitment, and our customer rights to update are unrelated to what we provide as part of this agreement. So any feature that we are mentioning is not committed until completed and released to the public. And with that, we can at least have a peek to the agenda. So we're going to start covering what InterBase, some of the top elements of InterBase 2017, today's current version. Then I'll get back and discuss a few things Idera and Embarcadero are doing to help more developers use InterBase, and the rest will be focusing on what's coming in the new release. And finally, we'll provide some information about to sign up for the beta, with a caveat though that, as you might have seen, we have some of our servers malfunctioning actually for a few days, and so I don't think the beta sign up is currently working, but will be soon. Next, and I think it's Mary.
Thanks, Marco. So right now, as Marco said, our current version of InterBase is 2017, which we released back in March of 2017. And we introduced several new features like truncating and derived table support, monitoring of online databases, and expression indices, all things that our customers have been asking for. Now, our server edition provides support for 32 and 64-bit Windows, Linux, 32-bit Mac, and newly added 64-bit Mac OS X. With our InterBase To Go edition, it's actually a pretty unique offering. It's a full-featured multi-device embeddable database for Windows, OS X, Android, iOS, and with 2017 release, Linux for both 32 and 64-bit. It allows you to run in a standalone environment, but allows the deployment of applications which directly utilize the InterBase engine DLLs, giving users peace of mind that their data is always going to be available. Next slide. So with its near zero administration, small footprint, and easy install process, InterBase as a database software provides a fast, powerful, and reliable database engine capable of scaling users for any industry or business size, meaning it's fully customizable to your specific needs, and it's the database that continues to run. InterBase provides 256-bit encryption, which matches the federal regulations on personally identifiable information, and several other ways to keep your users' data safe. providing database and column level encryption with security and user roles to keep that data private, letting you focus on your secure application getting ready for market. InterBase supports effective disaster recovery planning through live backups, incremental dumps, multi-threaded restoring, write-ahead logging, and point-in-time recovery. So you can quickly revert databases to any second in time using our journal archivings. And journal archives can be stored off-device to provide the fastest way to recover your server, even if the backup hasn't run. You can even take snapshots of the database while the users are still connected and altering data. Next slide. While InterBase is finely tuned to perform with the Embarcadero developer toolset, so Delphi and C++ Builder, you can still use InterBase with a wide variety of languages like PHP and Ruby, Visual C++ and C, and still use the standard interfaces like ODBC driver, JDBC, and ADO.NET. Now, InterBase is designed to be a low maintenance or kind of a self-tuning database, making it great for embedded applications or even areas with a small IT support. So with its multi-version architecture and multi-core SMP support, as a developer, you still have the ability to take advantage of today's multi-core architectures and scale applications transparently across multiple CPUs. And InterBase also possesses like a number of tunable configuration parameters that allow higher end user servers to operate optimally in their specific environment, allowing for a range of application types to take advantage of some of our built-in monitoring tools that manage threads, transactions, procedures, and even memory usage. Now, back in 2014, we added change view support to InterBase XE7, and it's a patent pending subscription-based model that's used to describe some data and identify what data has been changed in the database. So change views not only helps to speed up applications, but lowers network traffic and costs by fetching only the changes that have been made to the database. What more, only after a device is granted rights and subscribed to specific tables or columns of data, it tracks what is changing at the field level for that subscription, and it really lets you control who has access to information relating to changes or updates on your database. All these features make InterBase a great choice for developing client-server applications. And now I'll go ahead and pass the mic back off to Marco.
Thanks. One important thing that we wanted to mention before getting to the core of the topic is that over the last couple of years since InterBase 2017 was released, there's been some interesting elements as part of the integration with other tools that either Embarcadero or IDR at large produce. Next slide. So the largest integration is with RADStudio. RADStudio includes the developer edition of InterBase, actually along with ready-to-use license, so that anyone using RADStudio can start using InterBase. Also, it includes IB Lite for the desktop and mobile platforms. IB Lite is completely free, and it even comes with a ready-to-use license key these days, so there are no extra steps to start using IB Lite on your Android and iOS mobile applications built with RADStudio, either Delphi or C++. We also provide a license of InterBase to go as part of the RADStudio Enterprise and Architect level, not for Professional or Community Edition. Professional and Community Edition have the IB Lite version available, but the mobile version of IB2Go is available for anyone on RADStudio Architect or Enterprise. The other significant integration is part of RAD server. RAD server uses InterBase as the database behind the scenes. So when we refer to RAD server database or EMS database, it's technically an encrypted database table, InterBase table. And so we are leveraging significantly InterBase as part of the RAD server deployment and the RAD server development model. Now, everyone can use any database for the application data that's provided to RAD server, but the RAD server database itself, the one, for example, keeping information about user, keeping the usage statistics data and so forth, that is InterBase. And finally, we just released RAD Studio 10.3.2 with the InterBase to go and IBLite support for macOS 64-bit, which is the new platform we've added for Delphi developers. On a completely different front-end area, Aqua Data Studio, which is a very nice and extremely powerful database development and administration IDE, has support for InterBase 2017 in the April 2019 release that was just done like a few months ago. So if you need like a nicer, more complex and powerful tool to manage your InterBase databases, but actually also many other databases, then you can have a look to the Aquafold website and download a trial from there. And with that, this is just kind of a start, but we are planning additional integration for InterBase throughout other Embarcadero and Idera company tools. And with that, I think we are ready to get to the meat of the session. I'll let Sriram continue and cover what's coming with InterBase.
Hello, good day, everyone. Just one point from the previous slide that Marco mentioned about Aquafold or from Aqua Data Studio was it's the only IDE that has a multi-platform coverage. So the same IDE, database IDE, can be used on Windows, macOS, and Linux to work with InterBase. So since there are InterBase customers using InterBase on all of these desktop server platforms, you can use a single database IDE without having to go back to just a Windows-based database tool. That is useful sometimes when you're working only on one of the platforms and not on the other. So InterBase's next release, project name Mise is something that we are very excited about, and we are improving the functionality that InterBase provides for our developers to use and define InterBase to suit their needs. Some of the upcoming feature themes for the release, and the main feature theme for this release is Tablespace support, and Charlie will go into a lot of detail covering Tablespaces in the next couple of minutes. Performance monitoring is a functionality that InterBase has provided for the last 10 years plus, and performance monitoring is a unique functionality within InterBase in that we provide a lot of performance metric data of how the engine is functioning with regard to how many users are connected to what databases and how long the queries have been running and what tables or stored procedures are being most used. We provide a lot of data that can be queried from within your application if you choose to do that using SQL, or you can use our command line and graphical user interface tools. And we have very good integrations with IB Console, which is our primary UI tool on Windows. There is a whole performance monitoring aspect of IB Console, which allows you to look at each and every individual metric and entity within the database, including triggers and procedures that are being used, as well as tables and other facets. And you can also drill down into how long a particular query has been running and take action on any rogue queries. If you think that a particular attachment or a query needs to be shut down, as an administrator of the database, you can do that using performance monitoring within InterBase. So we are enhancing on that support. Every major release, we try to make performance monitoring more useful to our customers. So in the previous release, previous couple of releases, we enabled support for 64-bit counters on performance monitoring. And in the last release of InterBase 2017, we added server-side monitoring for all connected databases for a single server instance. So before that, you had to connect to a single database to know what's happening with the database. But now we can connect to a server instance and say all the databases that are being served by that instance of InterBase, you can monitor all of them cumulatively rather than having to individually monitor their performance. So you get a better idea of what kind of a load is currently put on a server instance and how to manage that. So in this release for Mise en place, we are enhancing on that support by adding information about the various indexes that are defined in your database. And that is useful if you have to look at how a particular index is being used, what kind of statistics you can gather from that, and help tune your performances. We'll go into a slide in the next couple of minutes on that front as well. As Marco mentioned, we are always looking forward to building better support for our database developers. And data dictionary DDL is one such, where you can look at your database schema, and as a database developer, you can target specific descriptions for entities within the database. So we'll go into how that's being enhanced in the upcoming release. SQL optimizations and performance is something that we always try to address with every release. So we have some SQL queries that are better optimized in this release compared to the previous ones. We'll go into these details later. Security enhancements is we do interface or integrate with OpenSSL for over-the-wire encryption, as well as some of the encryption digests that we use from OpenSSL for providing additional functionality in both column level encryption as well as database encryption in InterBase. So we are bringing up the support to the latest versions of OpenSSL in this release, and also enabling support on other platforms, which we'll go into, like Android 64-bit and macOS 64-bit. So as Marco mentioned, we are starting a beta testing program for Mise en place, and we are very eager to hear from you all as to how you are using InterBase and how this new release will help you make your deployments and development better. And please do understand it's a participation under NDA, so there is a sign up required for that, and that is a sign up link on screen that you see for Mise en place. And as Marco mentioned, there have been a few issues over the last week with regard to network problems. So our IT team is working on getting all the systems back up very soon now, and in the next couple of days you'll be able to join up for this beta release. We are very eager to hear from you all on all platforms, Windows, Linux, and macOS. But please do whatever platform you're able to use, and provide any feedback on how we can make InterBase better for you. Please do join in the beta program. Now, going into the meat of the feature details for Mise en place. The first one is, of course, Tablespaces, and I request Charlie, who is a principal architect for the product, to take it up and describe to you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Sriram. If we look at an InterBase database today, at the physical schema level, it's defined over a collection of files. And over those files, we have a logically contiguous sequence of database pages of various page sizes, the default being 4 KB, of up to 2 billion pages. And so what we do is we're able to define our database objects at the logical schema level over that. And the placement of data in those objects is randomly scattered over the files that comprise the database. Now, most of you today use InterBase in a single file. The multi-file option was mostly due many years ago to when file systems had a file system size limit of 2 GB, and that's no longer the case, and usually there's no need to define multiple files. Well, with Mise en place, we are now allowing users to define tablespaces, secondary tablespaces that they define, which occupy separate files. In this initial release, that collection of files will consist of a single file. We may lift that limit at some point on customer demand, but in order to minimize complexity, in this first release, a secondary table space will consist of a single file. So we may think of today's InterBase database as being what we call the primary table space. And it's there by default, and Mise will interpret current databases as consisting of a primary table space. I might add that in no way do users have to employ the concept of table spaces or even know about it. This is purely a data definition feature. In all cases, your applications will 100% port over to Mise without regard to table spaces. But should you choose, you can now define your own secondary table spaces. And I'd like to review some of the features or characteristics of a secondary table space and why you might want to employ it. First is placement. You'll be allowed to place your database objects, of which in this release consists of a table or indices. Tables and indices you will be able to place in the table space of your choice. The default is always the primary table space, aka the database, but you may choose to put indices in one table space for a table and put the table themselves in another table space because you think maybe balancing I/O over indices and the data could be advantageous in your case, or the parallel I/O across multiple files and multiple volumes. Or you may choose to look at performance features of those devices on which the file system is mounted. Solid-state disks are very popular, enjoy very good capacity today and much better performance than hard disk drives. And today we even have objects or devices such as physically, I should say, persistent memory modules, such as Intel Optane, which actually are, occupy DDR4 DIMM slots next to the CPU, which allow non-volatile persistent memory and have incredible performance as well as persistence. So you may be able to target your production or OLTP tables to devices like that, and then have less performance sensitive tables be elsewhere. So that's one aspect. Secondly, archival. You may have, and this is I must admit, a major goal of Tablespaces in terms of what our customers have been asking for. You may have archival or history tables that are growing in size. You keep it on a monthly basis, and these tables can occupy 500 gigabytes, a terabyte, and they're not updated very often. They're queried a lot, or maybe at certain times to do analytics or something, but they do occupy space in the database. So that may be one reason to separate the criteria for separating tables to a different table space. And management is very important. And a little later in the talk, I'm going to discuss backup restore strategies. Needless to say, if you have some tables like these archival tables of 500 gigabytes or terabyte, you know the pain of trying to do a backup and trying to do a restore all the time on tables that may not be changing, and you really don't have a choice today. With Tablespaces, you do. Resources, when we look at the syntax of creating a table space, you'll see that it very much is similar in look to the syntax of creating a database. So you should expect that you can assign different attributes to table spaces, whether it's you want to make the table space read only, or you want to reserve space, or don't reserve space, again, for archival tables where you want to pack the rows as tightly as possible on a page. You can manage the resources. And I do want to come back to the safe harbor statement. Some of what I'll talk about today will be available in the initial release. Some is kind of where we'd like to take it based on customer demand and things. Some of these things will be very easy to add, and some might be customer demand, but you can imagine being able to have table spaces with different page sizes for whatever reason, tables that have large row sizes. You may want to change the page size, and even being able to designate named page caches that allow you to cache important tables. Maybe you want foreign key lookup tables to be cached all the time, memory resident. And again, it gives us in engineering a lot of opportunities. Again, going back to the persistent memory modules in Intel Optane, there'd actually be ways in which InterBase cache management system could directly memory map those files in a device like that and have zero first level access by mapping the file through our cache manager without actually having to read it. So there's lots of exciting opportunities to where we can go with that based on customer demand. Another aspect is growth. As I said, an InterBase database, the physical schema consists of 2 billion logical pages. Well, for our default page cache page size of 4 KB, that's a maximum InterBase database of 8 terabytes. With InterBase, by adding table spaces, you can actually, with that default page size, if you were judicious in your allocation and assignment of database objects, you could actually approach 2 petabytes because each of these table spaces has its separate 2 billion page size. They're separate file spaces. Auto-mountable, and that's really another way of saying when you attach an InterBase database with table spaces, we don't, with the current database, if you have a multi-file database, you're required to open every file in the database in order for the database to be accessible. We only open table spaces, their underlying files, on table reference. So if you don't reference tables, if you don't reference those archival tables, we're not going to open that archival table space. And there's no reason that any of those table spaces being inaccessible for whatever reason will stop you from accessing your database, or at least the tables that are accessible in other table spaces. So that's a nice feature. Metadata. A table space actually has self-subscribing metadata. And you'll see that this is important when we talk about backup restore. Every table space knows where its objects live. It knows where to find within the table space files where the pages are for an index, or where the pages are for a table. This is a minimum amount of metadata. The potential is to endow a table space with as much metadata as you want. And in fact, in the future, if again there was customer demand, you could see having a table space consist of enough metadata that you could actually import and export foreign databases into another database, take a copy of it and import it as a table space and be able to access it. That's not the state today, and that's my point is that there is a spectrum or sliding scale of metadata. We're at the very bottom of it, which allows the table space to sit and be accessible on its own. Temporal. You can assign your temporary tables to a table space and kind of keep that separate. And in particular, we're exploring being able to allow the users to, in general, you cannot alter the table space of the system tables, those RDB dollar and temp dollar tables you see in the schema. But we are looking at about the ability to have a user change the assignment of the temporary TMP dollar temporary tables, which are used for database monitoring, so that you can actually assign those to go to a separate table space that won't interfere with your the production cache or production access on the file. Not to mention your own user global temporary tables. So those are the top level aspects of table spaces. We're very excited about it, and we think they will be very useful for customers for a number of reasons, as I said, for either for performance reasons are for their backup restore and trying to pull that window in, that maintenance window in. So I'll pass it back to Sriram and talk to you a little later on some other more concrete details of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. As Charlie mentioned, database tablespaces is something that existing users can also benefit from. Or if you're building new database schema, you can build tablespaces into your design. For today's discussion, of course, we just wanted to take a sample database that you might have today, which does not have tablespaces enabled, and how to enable that with the new feature, right? How easy it would be to do that. So let's consider a sample schema here with no tablespaces. Just have a bunch of tables and big tables and temporary tables defined and to illustrate what your schema might look like. And as you noticed on this slide, there are no tablespaces mentioned, and everything goes to the only tablespace that's the primary tablespace in the database, which is not really named in existing releases of InterBase, but just for illustration, we are calling it primary. So you might want to take this schema and enable it for tablespaces. So just a visual representation. Today, your single database file looks like this, and you may be using multi-file databases, but as Charlie mentioned earlier on, that is more of a legacy feature that customers used to have when we used to limit database file sizes to 2 billion and 2 gigabytes per file. But now, for the last 15 years or so, we have had support for 64-bit file sizes, and you really don't. Most customers suffice with using a single file database, and the single file database can grow, of course, beyond 2 gigabytes, and there are many customers out there who are using it in hundreds of gigabyte size or more. And this is what your visual representation of a database looks like, where all the tables and indices are part of a single file database. So you would take that database and may want to split it into multiple tablespaces with Mise. Now, what Mise allows you to do is you can define a tablespace with its own characteristics. So you may want to put your split your normal user tables between the primary tablespace and, say, in this particular case, a tablespace by the name of foo1. A foo1 tablespace on this slide is just another file with its own tablespace definition, and it contains, it's a container where you can push table T3 and a bunch of other indices into the tablespace. But you might also want to have another tablespace called as foo2, where you put your big tables, the archive tables that Charlie was mentioning, where data does not really change a lot, but this does have a lot of information. You may have packed it with a no reserve clause, for example, so that it's compactly packed. There is not a lot of OLTP happening with those records in that table. So you may have a tablespace assigned to that functionality. Whereas you may want to also have a tablespace like foo3 in this slide. You can look at providing your temporary tables. Of course, you can have other tables as well, but you may want to assign a tablespace that is residing on a slower disk, for example, and you may want to put your temporary tables in that tablespace. Now, one thing that you wanted to mention was, even though you can containerize and put different tables and indices in each one of these tablespaces, it's really expandable beyond this example of 3 tablespaces. You can go all the way up to 254 tablespaces per database. So it gives you a lot of room to not only containerize your tables and indices that are specific to your application, but you can also grow your database size beyond the 32 terabytes that you can do with current releases of InterBase. You can go much, much beyond that. And every database, whether you use tablespace or not, does have a primary tablespace. And with this release of InterBase, of course, we are increasing the ODS version. So it's going up to 18. So the ODS version 18 will have a primary tablespace whenever you just create a database. And then you can choose to create tablespaces as you want. Charlie, do you want to go a little bit deeper into the syntax of tablespace and explain what this might mean?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So here we look at the syntax for creating a table space. That's the first step in the life cycle of table spaces. And For a table space, we have a number of attributes, and again, it looks a lot like creating a database, and we allow you to, I think in this first release, different page sizes won't be allowed, and you can understand that if you did have different page sizes, then you have to have different page caches. So some of these features may not be available in the first release, but this gives you an idea of how to create it. Also, you'll note that down in the syntax element for a secondary file, as I stated earlier, we are limiting a table space to a single file. So right now that will not be enabled, but it does again show the similarity to database, and we didn't want to not have that ability in at least the syntax potential. We want to preserve the way we define these in a way that allows us to add it if for some reason we would need to. And we don't think customers in general would generally have a need for that, but it is enabled syntax-wise. It's just not enabled for the user to be able to use it. Underlying, I should talk something about the changes in the system tables. Again, at the physical schema level, we look at table spaces as a collection of files with similar attributes. And so underneath, there's a new system table called $RW file spaces. And again, with the emphasis on this being a collection or group of files. And then it will hold most of the information that you use in the create table space DDL command. In $RW relations, there's an additional column called $RW file space name. And again, usually that will be primary. They'll have the name of primary if you haven't used table spaces. Otherwise, we'll have the secondary table space name. $RW indices also has the same column name, $RW file space name, and the same with $RW files, which tells you what file space this file belongs to. But going forward, I'm going to stick with the SQL logical schema name of Tablespace, but I want to give you some idea of what to look for underneath, under the covers, as it were. So we also allow alter table space to change some of the properties of a table space. And one thing it's not apparent when you say alter table space. Well, I take that back. This is only allowed to change the properties of a table space. What I want to say is related to a further slide. Sriram, we can go on now. So here's, once you've created a table space, there isn't much more to do except to tell create table and create index where you want the table space, where you want that object to reside. And it's pretty simple syntax: table space name, or primary. And again, if you don't have the table space clause, you're in primary, and there's really nothing to do. One thing I do want to say about the primary table space, though, all secondary table spaces only contain user data, only user data. When you look at the primary table space, you have all the system metadata, and you have user tables and user data. So that is a significant difference, and we'll see that difference comes into play when we talk about backup restore. Now, alter table, this is what I was referring to earlier. One thing you can't tell by this alter table command, if you want to change what table space a table is stored in, and this will become valuable during the beta if you participate and want to try this feature out, you might want to have an existing database and move your current tables, which are in the default primary table space. You might want to move them to a secondary table space. And the way you move data is actually with this alter table space or alter table command. It kind of has that a little bit of a kludgy syntax, but it's in keeping with alter table, alter column syntax that you have for changing column attributes on a table. This allows you to change the table space attribute, and as a side effect, it will copy the data. So if you're copying a large table, don't expect this command to come right back to the iSQL prompt when you're doing this. It will take time. Likewise, if you want to move an index to a different table space, the same syntax. I should mention that this is a very efficient move. It's done it's a page-by-page copy. It's not row-by-row inserts. So it is really a identical verbatim copy of your table. And again, in this first release of InterBase, all table spaces will have the same page size as the primary. So every alter table space is a page copy. If in a further release we would introduce different page sizes, then you would have to do row by row copies. But the nice thing about the way this is now with the same page size is if you have change view subscriptions, you won't lose any of the change view behaviors between different subscribers to the changes of a table. All the data comes over, all the back versions come over, everything is purely identical. So if we have two different subscribers and one's a little behind on retrieving changes to a table, that user will still get all the changes they were to get before they moved the table, and same for every user. So that's a nice feature, and it's very performant as well. But like I said, there is really no change you'll have in your application to use Tablespaces. There's no DML, none of the frameworks have to know anything about this unless they help in defining. They support DDL. So, you know, this is pretty much it: creating the table space and then designating tables and indices to have that table space attribute. And that's it. Back to you, Sriram.
Thank you, Charlie. So looking at the sample that we spoke about a couple of slides earlier, the DDL that you would execute on your existing database is just a slide that you see in front of you, where you would just create tables, and you can see foo1, 2, and 3 are the 3 new table spaces that you want defined. And just for illustration, the first table space has a no reserve space defined, and you may choose to use different attributes that Charlie talked about, whether they are encryption keys that are used on a particular table space or a reserve clause. And you can assign your tables by just altering the table syntax to go to a particular table space. As you notice out here, table T3 or the big tables go to a different foo2 database, and the temporary tables go to foo3, as we saw in the slide earlier. So it's as easy as this, just to use the alter table and alter index syntax that Charlie mentioned in the previous slide. iSQL, the command line tool that we support, also has some commands to show database attributes or different entities that are defined in the database. We have enhanced that with Tablespaces as well, so you can quickly browse and look at what tables and indices reside in a specific database. Tablespace backup restore is something that Charlie can go into. Charlie, if you can take a couple of minutes, and then I can get back to the other features for Mise Plus.
Sure. So I'll move this along quickly. In backup restore, obviously we have all these different table spaces, and this is again, as I mentioned earlier, this is a primary motivator, is that we want to allow staged and staggered backups of your table spaces. By default, you can back up your whole database and all of its secondary table spaces into a single backup file if it will fit, or you can split your logical backup into the primary, and each secondary table space can have its own file, a table space backup file that contains only its data, and then you can start restoring each of these singly. We'll have in GBack and service provided services, there'll be a -tablespace switch that allows you to name the table spaces involved in that GBack command. So you'll be able to back up individual table spaces. You'll be able to restore logically, at the logical level, you'll be able to restore individual table spaces. And this is important. This is very important. If you have archival table space that has 500 gigabytes and your production database is 100 gigabytes, users have been complaining, gee, when I have to restore this, it takes forever. What you can do is you can restore that 100 gigabytes of your absolutely important OLTP data and work with that. And as I said, remember I said Tablespaces are auto-mounted, so you can get back online. You can start, if you want to, you can then start restoring your archive table space with the 500 gigabytes and let it just run. Now, you won't be able to access those tables, but your production database will be running because it's not required to load that table space for the database to come up. So that's real important. Also, there'll be support at the online physical dump level. And again, we have things called, we have one online dump that's called distinguished. And the database keeps track of all the pages that have changed since the last dump of that distinguished online dump. And that extends through Tablespaces. So all Tablespaces will keep track of all their pages that have changed since the last dump. So importantly, for instance, in that archival Tablespace, if you want to change it to be read-only after you had backed it up, you could be assured that no data would change in it, and you would never have to worry about backing it up, or even when you wanted to restore it as an online physical dump, you would know that the data hadn't changed. And really, restoring an online physical dump is just a matter of copying the file back to the original path name for that table space, or which might involve a movement of data, or if it's on the same volume and file system, it's really literally just renaming it in the file system directory, and it's available, in a split second. And again, what will happen, you have to understand, is when you're staging and staggering the backup and restoration, you're no longer having everything restored at the same transaction. It's not transaction consistent across the whole database, but that may be fine. Like I said, in an archival table space, if you know the data hasn't changed over the course of the last month because you had it read-only, it doesn't have to come back. It would be transaction consistent, but it's all for you to decide, as well as how you want referential integrity constraints to cross table spaces, because that is allowed, but that may have ramifications if you have to restore an old logical backup or an old logical physical dump. But this really gives you maximum flexibility, allows you to recover quickly when you need to in the minimum amount of time, and really, I think, help customers trying to manage larger InterBase databases. So I hope that wasn't too fast or too much of a whirlwind, but there you have it. Thanks.
Thank you, Charlie. Just one note to add to that, and that would be, we will be looking at providing logical backup functionality where you can take an existing database and it would be compatible to be restored onto a different version of InterBase. And in that, if the target server supports Tablespaces, then the restore will respect what Tablespaces have been backed up and the definitions and create those files. Whereas if the target database, like if you want to go take an existing backup which has Tablespaces, but the server does not support, like the previous release of InterBase did not support Tablespaces, then the database will be restored as a primary Tablespace database. So you will not be losing your data. We are looking at how we can make it compatible so that customers can not only upgrade from InterBase 2017 to use Mise, but if there is a need where they need to restore the database to both Mise as well as to older InterBase releases, we're looking at how we can do that for restore functionality. So moving on to the other couple of features that we wanted to highlight today. Performance monitoring for index usage is just another system table where we gather a lot of index-related runtime metrics, and it might be useful for you to know how your database indices, whether the indices that you've defined for supporting your queries to perform the best are being used, or there might be instances where you may have duplicate index definitions, and you might want to know some performance metrics on whether they are being used or not, which index is being used, and how to sort of cut down on duplicate indexes, because they do occupy space on disk, and you may not want that because that increases the database file size. So we do have a few samples here on this slide to look at what you can do with this performance monitoring metrics for indices. The first one is you just list a set of indices that are specific to a table that are currently loaded into the system. This is different from all the indices that are defined for the table on disk. These are only indexes that are currently being used. So that gives you a good sample of which indexes are not being used and whether you may want to have it in your database definition at all. The second sample, which looks at what's the depth of an index. The index depth defines, because the interface index structure is a B-tree index, and how many levels a particular fetch needs to go through before it can give you a record, information about a particular record, is something that you might want to track, because that defines how large the index has grown. And the index depth is somewhat related to the page size, how many index keys can be accommodated in a single page before it has to split in that same level. And once that level has been exhausted, Interbase goes ahead and creates another level. So it has to now go through multiple levels to get to the record. If you see index depth going beyond 3, that's a good indication that there's a lot of levels it has to go through to fetch a single record for you. So you might want to look at strategies where you increase the page size so more index nodes can fit in the same level. So this gives you information about the loaded index and how the depth sort of signifies that. The third sample out here is an index, how many indexes you have defined with lots of segments, segments meaning columns out here. You might also want to know which composite key indexes are really being used in your database, because for each composite key the index key size is larger than for a single key, depending on your column size, of course. And you might want to know, are those composite indexes being useful in servicing your queries? And this allows you to see, this is the number 10 out here, it's just a sample. You can say where TMP $index segments are greater than 3. So if you have composite keys that are more than 3 columns, you may want to look at those. The fourth sample out here is just to find out which foreign key indexes have been used on your system or currently being used at runtime. And it gives you, there are various index types, including primary, foreign, or expression key indexes. With InterBase 2017, as Mary mentioned earlier on, we started supporting expression index in InterBase, and whereby you can define specific expressions and assign those to the index definition. So when a record is stored, there's an equivalent index key that is created for that formula or for that expression. So when you have queries with where conditions, using those expressions, InterBase is now able to optimize your query to use that index rather than having to load or do a natural scan on the whole table. So you might want to know which of your expression key indices are being used, and it allows you to do that as well with this performance metric. And the last sample that you see out here, InterBase is self-tuning, in the sense when you go ahead and delete records, even the index nodes that are related to those records are deleted, whereby you might come to a stage where certain index pages are now empty or below a threshold, and thus can be either garbage collected or combined with another page that is adjoining or adjacent to that particular index space in the tree. So you might want to see how the how many delete operations have been happening and how it is affecting your index. So in the future, you might want to go ahead and reactivate the index or reset the index statistics so the optimizer can better use your index. So these are all just some samples that we wanted to go over for performance monitoring of index usage. The next feature we'll take a look at quickly is data dictionary support. Today, many of the interface entities that you define, you can go ahead and also assign a description to each one of this. So it's useful as a data dictionary to not only to your database developers, but also to your application developers who are looking at those entities and saying, oh, how do I want to use certain columns in my queries, and what do they actually signify? Now, of course, you can go ahead and implement or run a update command for each one of these entities, or in the system tables that track these entities, and provide your own description. But you may want to have, what you're providing in this release is an easy way to use a single DDL syntax, what we call as alter description for, and then you can define what the object type is, whether that's a particular generator or a table or a tablespace in this case, or an encryption key, for example. You can define certain a text that is more user-friendly to your database developers and application developers to use. Now, of course, people who are developing tools that connect to InterBase databases. So database tools like Aquadata Studio or IB Console or any of the multiple third-party database tools that currently support InterBase. The tools developers can actually look at DDL and say, it's an easy interface for me to connect with InterBase and provide descriptions for each one of these entities. Just a sample of what you see on the slide out here is altered description syntax for the various entities, or some of the entities that we saw in the previous slide. So it's as easy as this to go ahead and set some text to your description for each entity, or you can just go ahead and nullify the description so there is none. As I mentioned earlier on, we do focus on providing any optimizations that we can in every release, and this release is no different. We are looking at providing, this is just a sample slide where we are looking at optimizing your SQL queries that are using the not operator in the conditions. And previously, in previous release of InterBase, we would not optimize this query to use any underlying index. But with this release, we are looking at converting this set of conditions to a suitable form that InterBase can use with underlying indexes on the same table. So for example, the first SQL query, the query that you see out here, has a not condition where f1 greater than or equals 2, but that might be suitable for an ascending index, but the not condition turns it to be not suitable for ascending index, but there might be a descending index on f1 that could use this, that could service this particular query. So we would convert this condition from a not f1 greater than 2 to just a f1 less than 2 condition. Now that immediately makes it suitable for a descending index to be used in this particular query. So InterBase will adjust your conditions to make suitable use of underlying indices, whether they're ascending or descending, and optimize your queries better. So now we move on to the Q&A section. Thank you for being patient with through all those features. We are very excited with what we can provide in Mise, and we look forward to your beta participation. So please do sign up in the next couple of days as our systems get back to normalcy, and we really look forward to your feedback. And now I open it up for our Q&A. Marco?
Sure, I can ask the question if we have a few that are already in, but feel free to type in your additional question at this point. So one question we have, and I thought I knew the answer, but I don't. If there is comparison of SQL capabilities between InterBase and SQLite, I thought there was a document on the website, but I cannot find it, so maybe I was wrong. Do you know if there is any specific document comparing the SQL capabilities between InterBase and SQLite?
Not on our website, on our public portal, but there are facets of SQLite that we know that are different from InterBase, and we do have some internal document notes, but there are a lot of third-party websites that I remember, so maybe we can provide a couple of those links. These third-party websites actually look at the feature parity between many different database vendors. So you can customize your search to choose the two database backends that you are interested in comparing, in this case InterBase and SQLite, and look at, they're fairly good in terms of comparing the features. They may not go into the nitty-gritty detail of what one database is providing compared to the other, but the general feature set, like ANSI SQL compliance or specific DDL that's supported from or entities that are supported by one database, or even the transaction or the scalability metrics of one database compared to the other, and the platform support as well.
Okay. There is another question I can take. It's comes from Bruce as well. Says he avoided the free InterBase queue because it is a bit of a pain to get it configured. I imagine that with RAT server and for mobile. Now, until 10.3.1, you had to go to a specific website and like a registration site, put in your key and get back the actual license file that you had to put into your deployment folder, and that with that you could deploy to for example, mobile platforms. Now this is all changed, I think, since 10.3.1, if I'm not wrong. And now the file, the physical license file is already deployed. It's the same for everyone. It's already deployed as part of the standard installation. And so once you install RAD Studio, all you need to do is make sure that in your deployment window there is that file selected, but it is selected by default, and then you're good to go. So we've really tried to put some significant effort in simplifying the deployment of applications. Another question that came in is a person is asking if recursive is only a reserved word or if it has been implemented.
That is reserved, but it has not been implemented in derived tables yet. No. Good feedback for product management if that is decided.
Okay. Okay. Another question is if there is a way, or I guess an easy way, to use InterBase from JavaScript, and particularly for a Node.js server. And they say there is a Node fiber driver, so they're asking if there is an equivalent of this driver for InterBase. From what I know, the answer is no, but if I'm not the most expert.
No, we are not aware of InterBase specific JavaScript driver at this point. So we would love to have that. So if there is community interest in having that driver available for your InterBase deployments, please do communicate that feedback to us. We will definitely prioritize it. Okay, thanks a lot. I just wanted to go back to the first question where the user had InterBase versus SQLite comparison request. Right now we don't have that chart to show you, but one thing that I would mention a couple of things that are that should be highlighted from an InterBase perspective. Now, of course, InterBase does support Windows, Mac OS, Linux, Android, and iOS in various flavors, whether it's a server edition or a to-go edition in all of those platforms, and server edition on the desktop platforms. InterBase scales all the way from a single user deployment to hundreds of users. So the scalability is one defining distinction, I would say, between SQLite and InterBase. And with InterBase, of course, you do not have to change any of your application specific on the platform or the edition that you're using, other than IB Lite, which is sort of limited with regard to the licensed capabilities within the embedded IB Lite feature. IB2Go and Server Edition does support all the functionality that InterBase provides. So if you're looking at using IB Lite today, because it's a free deployment and it's equivalent to SQLite in many of the facets, but you want to scale your application with other things like change views or strong encryption support, or you want to scale it to a desktop platform for hundreds of users, you can look at InterBase for that purpose as well. So InterBase does service what SQLite provides and a lot more. And if you're interested in data encryption, what InterBase has with column level encryption is, from what I understand, SQLite has only a whole database level encryption that you can enable as a third party. That's not enabled by default, but InterBase does allow you to not only provide full database encryption, but you can also fine tune it to specific columns within your database if you choose to do that. So those are some highlight items that are different in InterBase compared to SQLite.
Okay, there's a different question. Is there any plan to add some extended logging mechanisms for SQL statements? For example, SQL statement executed in the last 5 minutes.
If you're using performance monitoring, you can currently look at SQL statements that are still in cache, and if they've been used for more than 5 minutes. But for statements that have actually come and gone and they don't have an existing state in memory, if it's been closed and it's been garbage collected from a runtime perspective, then you will not be able to look at its performance metric. But we do have logging capabilities in a tool called as IB Console that we provide on Windows. And it, of course, performance monitoring is something that you work with as a snapshot of information. So IB console does have this logging capability where you can say, for the queries that are running, $TMP statements is the table that actually tracks all the queries that are running. You can frequently poll that particular table for information and store that off in your logging table using IB console. And you can define various metrics as to when a particular statement was started. So in your case, if you're looking at in the last 5 minutes, if your query has been running, then you can look at how long it's been since it started. Charlie, did you have anything more to add on to that?
No. I mean, that request has come up. Usually it's in different contexts. Some people are interested in the formal auditing ability for that. Some people are just like, we had some performance problems and we kind of wonder what was running in that time period. And it could be as simple as logging it to an InterBase log file in the file system. I'd like to get more clarity on how rich the feature would be and what the customer would want, because certainly a low-level logging mechanism to a log file would be fairly easy to do, but that might not be sufficient. So we'd like to know more through product management about that.
Okay, I want to reiterate, because another person has been asking, the DigSig server is actually not available at this point, like a few other of our servers. We hope to have good news from IT, possibly even today, but it might take an extra day or two to have the ability to sign up for the beta. This is only beyond the InterBase team, and it's affecting the entire Embarcadero website properties. So last question I have here is, are there any plans to implement inline views?
Separate from a derived table, being able to embed in the derived table request. I'm not sure what they mean by an inline view. Materialized views, but I know with a derived table, you can actually put the definition of a view embedded in the query. I wish I could know what you meant exactly by an inline view. So I can't answer that question very succinctly.
Okay, if the person is still online, maybe we can follow up over email. Feel free to email either marco.com@embarcadero.com or Sriram or any of us, and we can, with some more information, and we can provide an answer. I'm saying that because we're already 12 minutes past the hour, and it's been really a pleasure to have this webinar and a lot of people attending. Thanks a lot for all of the people who have contributed as speakers. If there is any final word you want to say, Sriram, Charlie, Mary, otherwise we'll close the webinar and say and again invite everyone to join the InterBase beta.
Absolutely, and Marco, I just second your thoughts right there. And thank you, Charlie and Mary and Marco, for joining in the call and presenting the details. We are very excited with Mise and look forward to our customer community. We look forward to your invaluable input right there in defining how InterBase can service your needs better. So please do join the beta when you get a chance, and give us your feedback. We'll try our best to get back to you with what we can do.